My name is Oscar. I am a historian by trade, though the title has begun to feel like a borrowed coat, ill-fitting and worn. My specific field of study is the folklore of isolated American communities, the peculiar mythologies and anxieties that sprout in the nation's quiet, forgotten corners. For years, I have inhabited the hushed reverence of archives, tracing the genealogies of ghost stories and local legends from brittle newspaper clippings and faded manuscripts. Yet, the academic theories always felt sterile, disconnected from the visceral, psychological reality of the places that birthed them. The danger and isolation of early mountain life were, according to scholars, a fertile ground for the legends that persist today. But understanding this from a climate-controlled library is one thing, experiencing it is another entirely. The advertisement for a fire lookout in the Kentucky wildlands, therefore, presented itself as less of a job opportunity and more of a siren's call. It promised no prior experience needed, only a profound willingness to embrace solitude. For me, it was a chance to conduct an unorthodox, immersive form of fieldwork. I intended to submerge myself in the very environment that has historically served as a crucible for psychological strain and folkloric invention. I informed my university department that I was embarking on a research sabbatical. In truth, I was escaping the suffocating quiet of academia for a different kind of silence, one I hoped would be more honest, more revealing. The steel spire, the drive deeper into the Cumberland Plateau, was a journey of subtraction. Paved roads gave way to gravel, then to deeply rutted dirt tracks that scraped the undercarriage of my sedan. The mountains grew larger, more ancient, pressing in on either side. This was the Kentucky wildlands, a place that felt profoundly disconnected from the 21st century. One of the few places in the state where pre-settlement natural conditions still seem to exist. The forest here was a mixed mesophytic marvel, most biologically diverse, temperate forest in North America, a dense and tangled wilderness that had swallowed whole the scars of the Mowbray and Robinson lumber companies clear, cutting a century ago. I parked where the road dissolved into the woods and shouldered my pack. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. The trailhead for the boarding house trail was marked by a simple wooden sign. The trail itself, I knew from my perfunctory research, had been carved out by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s to build the very tower that was now my destination. It was a relic of the New Deal, a testament to a time when the nation sought to tame its wilderness. The hike was grueling. The 0.9-mile trail gained over 600 feet in elevation, a relentless climb that left my city's soft muscles screaming. As I ascended, the forest changed. The lush, shaded cove at the bottom gave way to a drier oak, hickory environment on the slopes. The silence was absolute, broken only by my own ragged breathing and the rustle of unseen things in the undergrowth. And then, I saw it. Cresting the final ridge, the tower rose from the trees like a skeletal finger pointing at the sky. It was a stark, 60-foot structure of galvanized steel, US 158, a lonely sentinel on the highest point for miles. It looked both impossibly fragile and stubbornly permanent. The climb up the 6 flights of metal stairs was dizzying, the wind whistling through the girders. The cab at the top was a small, 10 by 10-foot room enclosed in glass. It was Spartan but functional, a single bed folded against one wall, a small table, a bookshelf, and in the center of the room, the heart of the lookout, an Osborne fire, fender mounted on a pedestal over a large, detailed topographical map of the forest. The view was staggering. An unending ocean of green and gold rolled away in every direction, a landscape of profound, intimidating beauty. From this vantage point, I could see how the main block of Robinson Forest had been isolated from the surface mining that scarred so much of the surrounding plateau. It was a sanctuary, or a prison. I wasn't yet sure which. The predecessor's addendum, after making a brief, crackly radio call to a woman named Allison who confirmed she was my contact in the next tower over, I began the process of settling in. The official Division of Forestry handbook was on the table, a slim volume of regulations and procedures. As I thumbed through it, a folded piece of paper slipped out from between the pages on fire. Weather observation. It was a single sheet of lined notebook paper, filled with a messy, frantic script written in blue ink. The pressure of the pen had been so intense, it had torn the paper in places. At the top, a title was scrawled: Rules to Avoid the Smiling Lady. My historian's instincts flared. This was a primary source document, a window into the unraveling mind of my predecessor, Harvey. I felt a grim, academic fascination. This was the loud quiet Mark had warned me about manifested on paper. I smoothed the page out on the table, my eyes scanning the desperate, paranoid commandments. It was a classic catalog of folkloric dread and psychological horror tropes. A malevolent female spirit, auditory and visual hallucinations, ritualistic behaviors born of fear. It was all here. The manic smile was a perfect invocation of the uncanny valley, that unsettling space where something is almost human, but wrong enough to trigger revulsion. To maintain my sense of intellectual distance, to frame this not as a warning, but as a case study, I took out my own journal. I would catalog Harvey's delusions, analyze his psychosis from the safety of my academic training, dissecting his descent into madness rule by rule. 1. If you see a woman in the woods with a manic smile on her face, don't approach her or draw attention to yourself. Return to your tower. My analysis: a classic folkloric specter. The manic smile suggests the uncanny valley, likely a hallucination triggered by pareidolia in the dense woods, a manifestation of sexual anxiety or fear of the feminine unknown. 2. If your radio goes off, and it's anyone except your closest tower, don't answer it, no matter what you hear. My analysis: auditory hallucination combined with paranoia, a fear of the outside world infringing on the safe, isolated space, a standard symptom of isolation-induced psychosis. If you hear a woman crying between the hours of 4 a.m., ignore it. My analysis: a common ghost trope, the La Llorona or Banshee archetype, the specific time frame, the witching hour, is a classic element. Likely misidentified animal cries. Foxes and bobcats can produce disturbingly human-like sounds. 4. At night, always sleep with your lamp on. If it starts to flicker, quickly run to turn on your main light until morning. If your lamp flickers off completely before you can do this, hide under your bed until morning. My analysis: a ritualistic response to a fear of the dark. The flickering light is a common horror device, symbolizing a weakening barrier against evil. Hiding is a primal, childish response to fear. 5. At night, if you hear someone running up the stairs to your tower, also turn on the main light until morning. If you don't do this by the time she's at the top, it's too late. My analysis: a more direct, physical threat. The sound of pursuit. The main light, a powerful, artificial source of illumination, is positioned as a protective ward. The "it's too late" phrasing is pure melodrama. 6. If you wake up and see the smiling woman staring at you through your window, hide under your covers and hold your breath. She will come into your hut and you will feel her breathing right above you as if she is hovering over you. Do not breathe. This will last only a few seconds. Once you feel her leave, turn on the main light until morning. My analysis: the most detailed and disturbing rule combines the nightmare that may have been real trope with specific, terrifying sensory details. The act of holding one's breath is a fascinating addition, a physiological control asserted against a supernatural threat. 7. If you hear any scratching at any point, either on your hut or by the outhouse, turn off all radios and hide under your covers until the scratching stops. My analysis: animalistic threat. Scratching implies claws, a bestial quality. Hiding under the covers again reinforces the theme of regressive, ritualistic safety behaviors. 8. If you are investigating a campfire at night, and upon your arrival you hear a woman scream, run back to the tower as fast as you can. My analysis: allure. The scream is bait, designed to draw the victim away from the safety of the tower. This suggests a predatory intelligence. 9. If at any point you are returning to your tower, and you notice someone else inside it, run. Do not stop running until you reach the next tower. Don't look back. She will be chasing you. My analysis: the doppelganger, or infiltrator, trope. The ultimate violation: the safe space has been compromised. The command, "Don't look back," is a motif found in myths from Orpheus to Lot's wife. I folded the note and tucked it back into the handbook. A fascinating, tragic document. Poor Harvey. The forest had chewed him up and spat him out. It wouldn't happen to me. The first transgression night fell not as a blanket, but as a tide. The darkness rising from the deep hollers and flooding the ridges until my glass cab was a tiny island of light in a black, silent sea. I tried to work, to lose myself in the familiar comfort of my own writing, but the silence was distracting. It was a physical presence pressing in on the glass. Around 2 a.m., I heard it. A faint, mournful sound carried on the wind. It sounded impossibly like a woman weeping. Rule 3. My mind immediately supplied the rational explanation of Vixen's cry. I'd read descriptions of it, how eerily human it could sound. I took a sip of my cold coffee, a smug smile on my face. I would not be so easily fooled. An hour later, the main radio crackled, startling me so badly I nearly dropped my mug. It wasn't Allison's clear, professional voice. It was a torrent of static, lace speech. A man's voice speaking in what sounded like a nearly extinct Appalachian dialect, full of strange cadences and forgotten words. Rule 2. I shook my head. Signal bleed from some remote valley, a ham radio operator bouncing his signal off the ionosphere. Nothing more. I was feeling intellectually superior, a bastion of reason in a place that had driven my predecessor to madness. I was in control. That's when I heard the first thump. It came from the bottom of the stairs. A heavy, metallic impact. It was followed by another, and a rapid, rhythmic cadence. Thump, thump, thump. It was the sound of someone running up the metal stairs. Running impossibly fast, with a weight and power that made the entire steel structure vibrate. My blood went cold. My carefully constructed rationalizations evaporated in a flash of pure, animal terror. This wasn't a fox. This wasn't radio interference. This was real. This was happening. Thump, 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 thump. The sound grew louder, closer. The third flight. The fourth. Rule 5 screamed in my mind about. If you hear someone running up the stairs to your tower, also turn on the main light until morning. If you don't do this by the time she's at the top, it's too late. My academic mind was gone, replaced by a lizard brain that understood only one thing: threat. Before the sound could reach the fifth flight, I lunged across the cab, my hand slamming down on a large, red industrial switch on the main console. With a loud clunk, a bank of powerful floodlights, mounted on the cab's exterior, burst to life, bathing the clearing and the tower itself in a harsh, sterile white glare. The running stopped. Instantly, the silence that rushed back in was heavier, more profound than before. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I crept to the window, peering down the staircase. Nothing. The metal steps were empty, gleaming wetly in the artificial light. The forest edge was a solid wall of black, beyond the light's reach. There was nothing there. I stood frozen in the center of the brightly lit cab for a long time. The only sounds my own ragged breaths and the frantic beating of my own heart. The rules weren't a case study. They were a survival guide, and I had just passed my first, terrifying test. Sleep did not come. The floodlights I had activated in a moment of primal terror now served as a cruel, unblinking sun, bleaching the night of its shadows and creating a sterile island of visibility in a sea of absolute black. The forest beyond the lights' reach was no longer a landscape to be observed. It was a solid wall, a waiting, watching entity. My academic journal lay open on the table, its pages filled with my own arrogant, clinical analysis of Harvey's supposed psychosis. I looked at my neat handwriting, the confident deconstruction of folkloric tropes, and felt a wave of nausea. The man who wrote those words was a fool, an academic tourist who had mistaken a survival manual for a quaint local artifact. That man was gone, replaced by a trembling creature trapped 60 feet in the air in a glass box. As the true dawn finally broke, painting the eastern sky in bruised shades of purple and orange, I knew I couldn't endure another night like the last. I needed answers. I needed to know if I was truly alone in this madness. My hand, slick with sweat, reached for the radio. "Allison, this is Oscar." "Over." My voice was a dry rasp. The reply came after a few seconds of crackling static. "Morning. Oscar. Everything all right? You sound a little rough." "Over." I tried to steady my breathing, to sound less like a man on the verge of collapse. "Yeah, fine. Just a long night. Listen, I wanted to ask you about Harvey. The guy who was here before me." There was a pause. "What about him?" "Over." Her tone was cautious. He left some things behind. Some notes." I decided against revealing the full, terrifying scope of the rules. They were strange. He seemed worried about something. Or someone. "Over." A long sigh came through the speaker, heavy with resignation. "Look, Oscar Harvey was a good guy, but he was out here for over a year, refused to take a break. The isolation, it gets to you. In the last few months, he got obsessed. Claimed he kept seeing a smiling lady in the woods. He wouldn't talk much about it. If I pressed him, he'd just go silent. I thought he was just losing it. Then one day, he was just gone. His gear, his bags, everything. Vanished. Over." My blood ran cold. So he wasn't the first. The man before him. Rick. Did he ever see anything? The silence on the other end of the radio stretched for an agonizingly long time. He asked me once. Allison said finally, her voice barely a whisper. A few days after I started, just before he quit. He asked if I'd ever seen a woman in the woods. A woman that smiles. I told him no. I thought he was just being weird. Over. A horrifying pattern was emerging. A lineage of terror attached to this specific tower. I wasn't the first to be haunted by these rules. I was just the latest. I had to know if I could trust her. "Allison, why did you take this job? It's not exactly a typical career path." Over. A nervous, humorless chuckle. "Gwess, we're getting personal." "Huh, my sister," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "She went missing. In these woods. Right before I started. I took the job to, I don't know. To look for her. To feel close to the last place she was. Maybe help anyone else who gets lost. It's stupid, I know." Over. I thanked her and signed off. The radio falling from my numb fingers. The conversation had confirmed my worst fears, while simultaneously wrapping Allison in a new layer of mystery. Was her story true? Or was she a part of the trap? A missing sister was a powerful motive, but for what, I couldn't begin to guess. As dusk began to settle, a familiar dread coiled in my stomach. I wasn't going to be caught by surprise again. The moment the sun dipped below the horizon, I slammed the switch for the main floodlights, bathing my small clearing in their harsh, protective glare. I brewed a pot of coffee so strong it was almost sludge and sat in the chair, the worn, folded paper with Harvey's rules in my hand. I would not sleep. I would watch. But exhaustion is a patient predator. Sometime after 3 in the morning, my head slumped forward, my senses dulled by fatigue. I drifted into a shallow, dreamless doze. The rhythmic hum of the generator a deceptive lullaby. I awoke with a jolt, not to a sound, but to a feeling. A profound sense of wrongness. The cab was silent, the floodlights still buzzing, but the air was thick, heavy with a sudden, biting cold. I scanned the windows, my heart hammering against my ribs, and then I saw her. Pressed against the glass on the far side of the cab, a face stared in at me. It was pale, almost translucent in the stark white light, its texture like old parchment. The eyes were dark, cavernous voids that seemed to drink the light around them. And the smile, it was the manic, impossibly wide grin from Harvey's Note, a rictus of predatory glee that stretched the skin of the face into an inhuman configuration. It was the very definition of the uncanny valley, something that was almost human but twisted into a shape of pure revulsion. A scream caught in my throat, choked by sheer terror. My mind, no longer academic but purely animal, scrambled for a response, for a rule. Rule 6. If you wake up and see the smiling woman staring at you through your window, hide under your covers and hold your breath. She will come into your hut and you will feel her breathing right above you as if she is hovering over you. Do not breathe. This will last only a few seconds. Once you feel her leave, turn on the main light until morning. With a strangled sob, I lunged from the chair to the cot, diving beneath the single, thin wool blanket. It was a child's defense, laughably inadequate, but it was all I had. I squeezed my eyes shut and held my breath, my body rigid with fear. I heard the metallic click of the door. I hadn't even thought to check if it had a lock. The door creaked open. The cold intensified, seeping into the cab, a palpable, physical presence. I could feel it through the blanket. Do not breathe. The words screamed in my mind. A weightless pressure settled over me. I could feel her presence directly above the cot, hovering over me, her smiling face inches from the thin barrier of wool. My lungs began to burn, desperate for air. Black spots exploded behind my eyelids. The instinct to gasp, to scream, was overwhelming. I was going to pass out. I was going to die. Then, as suddenly as it began, the pressure vanished. The profound cold receded. I heard the soft creak of the door closing. I erupted from under the covers, gasping, choking on air, my body racked with violent, uncontrollable tremors. I scrambled to the corner of the cab, pressing myself against the wall, staring at the door. She had been inside. The floodlights, my supposed shield, had not stopped her. They had only illuminated her arrival. The tower was no longer a sanctuary. It was a compromised cage. Rule 9 echoed in my thoughts. If at any point you are returning to your tower, and you notice someone else inside it, run. She had been inside with me. The rule didn't fit perfectly, but the implication was terrifyingly clear. This place was not safe. I stayed huddled in the corner until the first rays of dawn pierced the gloom. I couldn't stay another night, but I couldn't run blindly into the forest either. There was only one possible destination: Allison's tower. I didn't trust her, but she was the only other human for miles. And a thought struck me, something she had said in a story. I'd read Harvey had worked out 10 rules, but the note only had 9. Did Allison know the 10th? The decision was made. As the sun climbed higher, I began to pack. I stuffed a few provisions, the radio and the small camera, I'd found in the bunker into my pack. From the toolbox, I took a long, heavy machete. Its edge, dull, but its weight reassuring in my hand. I glanced one last time at my academic journal. Then, with a surge of disgust, I tore the analytical pages from its binding and let them flutter to the floor. I unlatched the door and stepped onto the catwalk, the morning air cold against my face. I didn't look back. I descended the 6 flights of stairs, my knuckles white on the handle of the machete. The trails into Allison's zone were unmaintained, overgrown. It would be a long, difficult journey. But staying here was no longer an option. I plunged into the tree line, the deep, dark woods swallowing me whole. The forest floor was a chaotic tapestry of damp earth, decaying leaves, and tangled roots. The moment I stepped off the maintained path of the boarding house trail and into the unmanaged wilderness that constituted Allison's zone, the difference was palpable. Here the forest was not a park. It was a living, breathing obstacle. Overgrown bushes clawed at my clothes, and low hanging branches, heavy with morning dew, slapped my face. The machete, which had felt like a paranoid affectation just hours before, now felt like a vital extension of my own will to survive. I hacked at the dense flora, carving a crude path. The rhythmic thwack of steel against wood, a desperate drumbeat against the oppressive silence. This was the ancient heart of the Cumberland Plateau, a place that felt untouched by modern hands. The air was thick with the scent of pine and whetstone. Towering oaks and hickories formed a dense canopy that plunged the forest floor into a perpetual twilight. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every snap of a twig, sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through my system. My historian's mind, now a distant echo, recalled that the danger and isolation of early mountain life were believed to have birthed the very legends. I was now living. I was no longer an observer of folklore. I was a participant, a character in a story whose ending was terrifyingly unwritten. The journey was a grueling, 5-hour ordeal. My muscles, already sore from the initial hike, screamed in protest. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, but the fear was a more potent fuel. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that manic, smiling face peering from behind a tree trunk. The woods felt alive, and not in a welcoming way. It felt like a vast, indifferent organism, and I was an unwelcome microbe trespassing within it. Finally, through a break in the trees, I saw it. Allison's tower. It was identical in structure to mine, a steel skeleton rising from a small clearing. But as I drew closer, a profound sense of unease settled over me. Something was wrong. 50 feet from the base of the tower was the enormous, blackened circle of a massive bonfire. Far larger than any camper would ever need. It looked less like a campfire and more like a pyre. I approached the tower cautiously, my machete held ready. The entire structure had an air of neglect. Old spiderwebs, thick with dust and dead insects, clung to the banisters. The nests of birds were tucked into the steel girders of the cab, looking ancient and undisturbed. This place didn't look like it was actively inhabited. It looked abandoned. "Allison," I called out, my voice sounding small and thin in the clearing. Only the whisper of the wind through the pines answered. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was nervous, but I had to know. I began the climb, my steps far quieter than the frantic, thumping ascent of the entity at my own tower. Reaching the top, I peered into the cab. It was empty. A thick layer of dust coated every surface, so dense I could see faint tracks within it, but not of human feet. I tried the door. It was locked. A lock. My tower didn't even have one. Panic began to set in. This was her tower. I had followed the map, but she wasn't here. The place looked like it hadn't been used in months, maybe years. She had lied. The daily radio calls, the professional check-ins, all a fabrication. But why? I couldn't wait. Darkness would fall in a few hours, and the thought of being caught in the open, between two towers that were both compromised sanctuaries, was unbearable. I had to get inside. Reversing my grip on the machete, I slammed the heavy butt of the handle against the door, just above the knob. The wood splintered with a loud crack, and the door swung inward with a mournful creak. A wave of stale, cold air and dust washed over me. The inside of the hut was even worse than the outside suggested. It was unnaturally cold, a stark contrast to the humid air of the forest. My eyes fell upon stacks of old newspapers and files piled in a corner. Driven by a desperate need for answers, I knelt and picked up the top paper. The headline sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. Sister hikers missing. I frantically skimmed the article. It detailed the disappearance of two sisters in these very woods. But the story here was different from the one Allison had told me. The article stated that after a massive search, one of the sisters had been found alive and well. The other remained missing. Allison had presented herself as the sole survivor of a tragedy, a woman searching for her lost sibling. But if her sister had been found, was Allison the one who was still missing? Or had she lied about the entire event? My hands trembling, I dug deeper into the clutter. Underneath a pile of dusty rags, I found a large, dark blue rucksack. I pulled it out and unzipped it. Inside were men's clothes, hiking pants, shirts, a rain jacket. I plunged my hand deeper, my fingers closing around something hard and metallic. A hammer, a wrench, then a pair of sunglasses. I held them up to the dim light, filtering through the grimy windows. Scratched into the plastic arm were two faint initials, RS. Rick's stuff. The lookout before Harvey. My breath hitched. I rummaged further, my desperation mounting. My fingers found the familiar shape of a utility knife. I pulled it out. It was a beautiful, cared for tool. But it wasn't the knife itself that made my stomach clench. It was the delicate engraving on the handle. To my love, to you, Harvey. What? Why did she have Harvey's knife? Why did she have Rick's sunglasses? This was where their belongings had gone, after they vanished. Allison hadn't just been their neighbor on the radio. She had been here. She had taken their things. She was connected to all of it. I had to get out. I couldn't take anything. She would know I had been here. I stood up, my mind reeling, trying to piece together the fragments of this horrifying puzzle. Allison wasn't a fellow victim. She was a predator, a collector, As I turned to flee through the broken door, a voice spoke from directly behind me, calm and chillingly familiar. "Find what you were looking for, Oscar." It was Allison. I spun around, my heart seizing in my chest. Allison stood in the broken doorway, her silhouette framed against the fading afternoon light. Her expression was unreadable, a placid mask that betrayed nothing. My hand tightened on the machete, the sweat on my palm making the grip slick and uncertain. "Find what you were looking for, Oscar," she repeated, her voice calm, almost conversational. It was the same voice I had come to associate with, a fragile sense of safety over the radio, now twisted into a harbinger of absolute dread. "What is all this, Allison?" I managed, my voice a dry rasp. "Rick's sunglasses, Harvey's knife." A flicker of something, annoyance, perhaps, crossed her face. "Souvenirs," she said simply. "From the ones who didn't make it." I thought Harvey was different. He was smart. He figured out 9 of the rules on his own. She took a step into the dusty cab, and the door swung shut behind her, plunging the room into shadow. But he never figured out the 10th. My mind raced, trying to process the implications. "You knew," I whispered. "You knew about the rules. You knew about her?" "Her name was Sarah," Allison said, her voice suddenly soft, trembling with a grief that felt terrifyingly genuine. "She was my sister, the one the newspaper said was found alive and well. They lied. They found her, but she wasn't well. The woods, they did something to her. Changed her. She came back, but she wasn't Sarah anymore. She was just this hungry thing." With a smile, the pieces clicked into place with sickening finality. The missing sister wasn't a motive for a search. It was the entire foundation of the horror. "You've been feeding her," I said, the realization dawning. "Rick, Harvey, me. You lure people to that tower to keep her focused on them, to keep her away from you. She has to eat," Allison stated, as if it were the most logical thing in the world. "She gets so angry when she's hungry." The smiling lady focuses on one victim at a time. "As long as she's hunting someone else, she leaves me alone." Her eyes, dark and hollow, met mine. "But you're different, Oscar. You're a historian. You believe in patterns. You understand that some stories are true. Harvey was just a handyman. He saw the rules as a problem to be solved. You see them as a text to be understood. And now, you're her target. She's already got Harvey. She never gives up on her prey until she gets them. And it's you now." "What is the 10th rule?" I demanded, raising the machete. Allison didn't flinch. "You have to burn her," she said, her voice flat. "It's the only way. It has to be the one she's hunting. I've tried, but the flames won't light for me. She lit a fire for you. Now you have to light one for her." She told me the location. A small, hidden cave not far from the base of my own tower. A place where she and Sarah used to play as children. A place she had laid her sister's body to rest before it had become something else. I didn't have a choice. I had to trust her. But I didn't have to stay and chat. With a yell born of pure terror, I lunged, not at her, but at the wall beside her. I swung them a sheet, burying it deep in the rotting wood of the doorframe. As she flinched back, startled by the sudden violence, I shoved past her and burst out onto the catwalk, not daring to look back. I scrambled down the stairs, my feet slipping on the dusty metal, and plunged back into the overgrown forest, the path I had so painstakingly cleared now. My only escape route. The journey back was a blur of fear. Every shadow seemed to twist into a manic smile. Every rustle of leaves sounded like crawling limbs. I reached my tower as dusk was bleeding into night, the sky a bruised purple. I didn't go up. I frantically gathered what I needed from the supply bunker: a canister of kerosene and a lighter. Armed with my new, terrible purpose, I followed Allison's directions, my flashlight beam, cutting a nervous path through the encroaching darkness. The cave was exactly where she said it would be, its entrance a dark maw, hidden behind a curtain of ivy. The air grew cold as I entered. The darkness inside was profound, a physical presence that seemed to absorb the light from my flashlight, rendering it weak and pathetic. It was a darkness unlike any I had ever known. 10 minutes in, the narrow passage opened into a larger chamber. And there, laid out on a flat stone slab as if on an altar, was a body. It was desiccated, ancient, a husk of what was once a person. Sarah. My hands trembled as I unscrewed the cap of the kerosene canister. I began to douse the body, the acrid smell filling the small chamber. I pulled out the lighter, my thumb fumbling with the flint wheel. Crack. The sound was sharp, like a bone snapping. It came from the darkness at the edge of my light. I froze, my heart hammering. I spun around, shining the flashlight into the oppressive black. For a split second, I saw them, the bare, dirty calves of a woman, crawling away into the shadows. Something was in here with me. I turned back to the body, a fresh wave of terror washing over me. I had to be quick. I flicked the lighter. A spark. Nothing again. Spark. Nothing. Then I felt it. A change in the air. A drop in temperature, so severe it felt like plunging into icy water. I slowly raised my flashlight from the body on the slab. She was standing at the far end of the chamber, her eyes locked with mine, visible even in the near, total darkness. And she was smiling that wide, manic, predatory grin. Then, her arms began to break, with a series of sickening, wet cracks. Her elbows bent backwards, the bones jutting out against the skin of her forearms. Her body contorted, folding in on itself in a series of impossible, jolting movements. And with every crack, every grotesque snap of bone and sinew, her smile grew wider, stretching her face into a mask of pure, inhuman horror. She dropped to all fours and began to crawl towards me, her broken limbs scuttling across the stone floor with an unnatural speed. I screamed, a raw, primal sound of utter terror. My thumb worked the lighter with frantic desperation. Spark. Spark. Flicker. A tiny flame erupted, fragile and precious. As the crawling, broken thing lunged, I threw the lighter onto the kerosene-soaked body. The world exploded in a whoosh of orange light and searing heat. The entity shrieked, a sound that was not human, a sound of pure agony and rage that vibrated through the very rock of the cave. The firelight threw its wreathing, contorted shadow against the walls. A final, spastic dance of a nightmare made real. For a fleeting moment, in the purifying flames, I saw the smile melt away, replaced by an expression of profound, heartbreaking sadness. Then, she was gone, consumed by the fire, dissolving into nothing but smoke and memory. The fire burned itself out quickly. The oppressive cold vanished. The unnatural darkness receded, replaced by the simple mundane black of a cave. I was alone. I stumbled out of the cave and into the first light of dawn. I didn't go back to the tower. I didn't collect my things. I walked out of Robinson Forest and never looked back. I left my academic pursuits, my theories, and my arrogant analyses behind. I understand now that folklore isn't just a collection of stories people tell themselves to explain the dark. It's a warning. It's a set of rules. It's a survival guide for a world that is far older and far more terrifying than we can ever truly comprehend.